The pressure gauge read 10,916 meters. We were deeper than anyone had a right to be. Outside the reinforced viewport of the submersible Bathyscaphe 2, there was only a flat, featureless blackness that swallowed the high-intensity LED beams, rendering them impotent pencil lines in a universe of crushing darkness. "We're on the bottom, Dr. Thorne," Captain Elias Vance's voice crackled over the internal comms, strained but professional. Elias was an ex-Navy SEAL, all sharp edges and quiet confidence. He sounded less like a man navigating the deepest point on Earth and more like he was parallel parking a sedan. "I, Dr. Aris Thorne, a deep-sea biologist whose life had been a series of ever deeper dives, felt the usual cocktail of terror and exhilaration. We had reached the Hadal Zone, the floor of the Mariana Trench. We were closer to the Earth's mantle than to the surface, 8 miles of water above us." "Confirmed, Captain. Deploying dredge and hydrophone array now. Let's see what the Challenger Deep has to whisper today." Our mission was simple. Gather samples and record ambient sounds in the least explored place on the planet. For 2 hours, we worked in relative silence, the only sound the distant whir of the sampling arm and the hum of the life support. Then, the hydrophone data flooded the console. "Captain, I'm picking up something unusual. It's not geological, and it's too regular to be biological." I adjusted the filters, pulling the frequency down. Elias leaned over my shoulder, the faint scent of stale coffee clinging to his flight suit. On the speaker, the sound was thin, repetitive, and deeply wrong. It was a rhythmic, almost mechanical thrumming, like a colossal, slow-beating drum. "What is that? A tectonic fault?" Elias asked, frowning. "It's too regular, Elias. The pattern repeats every 3.8 seconds with perfect consistency. It sounds processed, like a pulse." I tracked the source. It wasn't coming from the seabed. It was coming from below. "We're getting a thermal anomaly, Doctor," Elias announced, his voice losing its calm edge. "Massive heat spike forming 500 meters below the hull, according to the sonar. It's too vast to be a vent. Below us, Elias, we're on the bedrock. There is nothing below this but the crust. Well, something is there now. It's rising." The rhythmic thrumming intensified, vibrating through the titanium hull and into our bones. The temperature outside spiked from near freezing to a scalding 45 degrees Celsius. The sudden thermal change caused a violent current to buffet the submersible, pulling us sideways. Elias fought the joystick, trying to maintain position. "Hold tight, Doctor. Whatever it is, it's big, and it's moving fast." Then, the light came. It wasn't the chemical glow of abyssal fish. It was a massive, coherent source of bioluminescence, a brilliant, throbbing magenta light that washed out our external LEDs and made the dark water appear thick and viscous. It filled the viewport. It was an impossible shape. Not a creature, not a rock formation, but something that defied classification. It was roughly toroidal, a gargantuan, pulsating ring of living, lattice-like structure, perhaps a kilometer wide, floating just meters above the abyssal floor. Within the glowing lattice, I could see things that looked like veins and ganglia, contracting with the 3.8-second pulse. "My God," Elias whispered, his professionalism finally shattered. It's a living structure." As I stared, horrified, the structure shifted. It didn't swim. It bent space. It rotated one massive segment, and where the light had been diffuse, a single, black aperture opened, a void within the magenta light. And from that aperture, the sound changed. The rhythmic thrumming modulated, sharpening into something that wasn't a pulse, but a language. It was impossibly low, a resonance that the human ear shouldn't be able to perceive, yet it bypassed my ears entirely, speaking directly in the bone of my skull. It wasn't English, or any terrestrial language. It was a sound of profound antiquity, A vast, indifferent intelligence, and it spoke a single, devastating concept. We waited for the water to drain. I stumbled backward, tearing the headset off, shaking my head violently. Elias was frozen, his mouth open, his eyes wide, staring into the magenta light. Elias, did you hear that? Did you hear it speak? He didn't answer. He was reaching, his hand trembling, toward a lever on the console, the manual pressure release. Elias, no, we can't surface yet. We have to record this. I scrambled to restrain him, but he was stronger, his gaze locked on the aperture. It's not waiting anymore, he choked out, his voice thin and hollow. A sudden, violent crack echoed through the hull, followed by the hiss of rushing water. Not from the viewport, but from the aft compartment where the battery core and main hydrophone were located. The internal lights flickered, casting strobe shadows on Elias's terrified face. The pressure inside the cabin plummeted slightly. We had a breach. Eject the ballast. Eject the ballast. Now. I screamed, hitting the emergency ascent button repeatedly. The explosive bolts fired. The bathyscaphe 2 groaned, freed from the seabed, and began its agonizingly slow ascent. As we rose, the giant magenta structure pulsed once more, a final, deafening drumbeat that rattled the hull. The dark aperture closed. The rhythmic thrumming faded, replaced only by the roar of the water rushing into the stern. Elias didn't make it. He succumbed to a fatal pressure change within minutes, his last look not one of pain, but of a quiet, awful comprehension. I alone survived the 7-mile journey back to the surface. The salvage team found me catatonic, clutching the hydrophone data drives. The bathyscaphe 2 was a ruin. The stern looked less like it was breached and more like it had been peeled open from the inside. I am now 3 years into recovery, and my report was classified Level 7 security. They chalked up Elias's death to hull failure under extreme stress. They gave me medals and therapy. But they can't erase the recording. They can't erase the 3.8-second thrumming pulse, or the moment it modulated into that single, impossible resonance. And every night, when the world outside is quiet and the air conditioning hums at a certain frequency, I hear the thought that settled into my mind at 10,916 meters. We waited for the water to drain. And I know, with chilling certainty, that whatever vast, ancient thing we disturbed down there, it wasn't waiting for the water to drain out of the trench. It was waiting for the water to drain away from the planet entirely. It was waiting for us to expose its environment. And now, thanks to the data I recovered, it knows we have the technology to do it. It's not sleeping. It's listening. And the pulse continues, echoing from the unmapped depths, counting down the 3.8 seconds until the next beat. The ocean is not a barrier, it is merely a filter. And something has just looked through it. Chapter 2. The Debriefing Chamber. The recovery wasn't measured in months, but in the slow, agonizing re-entry into a reality that no longer felt real. My therapy was a series of windowless rooms, fluorescent lights, and men and women in tailored suits who never blinked when I described the toroidal shape or the magenta light. They were analysts from a covert agency I later learned was designated Project Chimera, an offshoot of deep-sea military intelligence. They weren't interested in saving my sanity. They were interested in the data, the logs, and the lingering psychological imprint. The log shows a spike in your heart rate and Captain Vance's, simultaneous with the thermal anomaly. Agent Keller, a woman with unnervingly steady gray eyes, stated one Tuesday morning, 3 weeks post-incident. She leaned across a laminated table, her voice flat. But there is no audio recording of the alleged verbal phrase, "Doctor." The sound recorded by the main hydrophone, the one in the compartment that failed, is just noise. A deep, consistent, 3.8-second, low-frequency pressure wave. We call it the echo. Nothing more. You're wrong, I insisted, running a hand over the stubble I hadn't shaved in days. It wasn't audio. It was transcranial. It spoke directly into our minds, a single, declarative thought. Elias panicked because he understood it. He was trying to breach the hull to keep it from surfacing, or maybe to destroy us before it could get the data. Keller made a note. Captain Vance's actions are consistent with sudden onset high-pressure psychosis, Dr. Thorne. The sheer depth alone. Psychosis doesn't open a kilometers-wide, bioluminescent lattice structure. Psychosis doesn't generate 45-degree heat spikes and peel open titanium. They never accepted the visual description. The sub's external cameras, they claimed, were damaged before the event. The thermal spike, a minor subcrustal seismic shift. The breach, an undetected structural flaw. The only thing they validated was the echo. The rhythmic, 3.8-second pulse. The drives I had clutched were moved to a secure vault. I was given access to a sterile lab, working under supervision with a team of acoustic and cryptographic specialists. Our task: decode the echo. The head of this analysis team was Dr. Lena Hansen, a brilliant but socially awkward cryptologist. She wore thick glasses and had a way of looking at sound waves that suggested she saw the mathematics of the universe in them. "Aris, come look at this," Lena said one evening, months into the project. The labs were housed in a repurposed submarine pen hidden beneath a naval base, a perfect prison. On the screen was the spectral analysis of the 3.8-second pulse. It looked like a series of clean, repeating sine waves. If you treat the 3.8-second beat as a primary unit, like a clock cycle, the subharmonics are not random noise, she explained, tapping the screen. They are structured. Look at the amplitude variation on the 10 Hz subcarrier. Every 47th beat, the pattern shifts by a predictable coefficient. What does that mean? I asked, my blood suddenly cold. It means it's not biological or geological noise. It's a computation. We're listening to a vast, low-frequency processing system. If the 3.8-second pulses tick, the variations are complex instructions, maybe data transmission, or, and this is the terrifying part, calibration. Calibration for what? For itself. It's checking its own systems. And the sheer computational power needed to encode this complexity at this magnitude, it's staggering. It's like listening to the memory allocation of a mind the size of Manhattan. The isolation began to warp my mind. I was a scientist, dedicated to empirical proof, yet the only proof I had was a nonverbal message delivered in a moment of pure terror. The agency was happy with the computational analysis. They saw a potential power source or a new form of communication. They ignored the meaning. They wanted to harness the engine. I saw the driver. Chapter 3. The Conspiracy of Water. Over the next year, I became Chimera's chief expert on the echo. I spent my days mapping its intensity shifts against deep-sea currents and tectonic movements. I found something disturbing. The thermal anomalies that characterized the structure's appearance weren't random. It's not just heat, I told Lena, showing her a 3D model of the trench structure. The thermal spike is localized release of vast amounts of geothermal energy, the kind you get when pressure is released rapidly from superheated magma chambers. This thing, the structure, it appears when that energy is released. And it appears not to use the heat, but to absorb it. Absorb it for power? Lena asked, adjusting her glasses. No, to regulate its environment. Think about it. If something has been waiting below the crust for millennia, it is optimized for high pressure and high temperature. The Hadal zone, though hot compared to the open ocean, is still too cold for something that operates at near magmatic temperatures. The creature's appearance creates a sudden, localized thermal bloom, suggesting it is regulating its heat loss in water. Then I brought up a historical anomaly. In 1960, the bathyscaphe Trieste made the first manned descent to the Challenger Deep. They reported seeing a flatfish and a shrimp. Standard marine life, right? But the depth record was only 10,911 meters. Our depth reading was 10,916 meters. The trench is 5 meters deeper now than it was in 1960. Lena stared at the difference. Tectonic plates move, Aris. It's not much. But the Challenger Deep is an accretionary wedge. It should be getting shallower, filling in with sediment over time. Instead, it's deepened. And look at this. I pulled up a map of global deep-sea mining proposals, all labeled as mineral extraction projects. They weren't looking for minerals. They were looking for water. Specifically, processes that could remove water from localized areas. They were proposing massive, energy-intensive deep-sea pumping, desal, and redirection projects. Chimera isn't studying it, Lena. They're preparing the environment for it, I whispered, the realization a punch to the gut. The phrase, "we waited for the water to drain," it wasn't a taunt. It was a statement of requirement. They're waiting for the atmosphere of water to clear so they can exist outside their protective layer of pressure and heat. And we, humanity, are unwittingly building the tools to help them achieve it, under the guise of energy or resource acquisition. Project Chimera wasn't trying to defend Earth. They were, perhaps unknowingly, working to satisfy the deep-sea entity's ancient patience. They were facilitating the draining. Lena went pale, pushing her chair back. Aris, that's a monstrous leap of faith. It's pure conspiracy theory. Is it, Lena? Elias died trying to prevent the data from getting out. He saw it and realized what it meant. That our technology, our curiosity, was the key. He didn't want the waiting to stop. The tension became unbearable. I started hearing the 3.8-second pulse even when the equipment was off. It wasn't just auditory. It was a rhythmic pressure behind my eyes, a low thrum in my temples. The entity had touched my mind once, and the connection remained, a low-frequency anchor in the abyss of my sanity. Chapter 4. The Outlier. My security clearance was suddenly downgraded. I was moved from the Operational Analysis Center to a purely academic role, reviewing historical deep-sea documents. They were trying to sideline me. My dissent, my relentless focus on the meaning of the phrase, had become a liability. I knew I couldn't trust Chimera. I needed to surface the truth, but the only person who might listen was someone who already suffered a loss at the hands of the deep. I found Elias Vance's widow, Clara, living in quiet isolation in a small coastal town in Oregon. She was sharp, weary, and deeply cynical about the Navy's official report of operational failure and pilot error. I met her in a dusty cafe overlooking the churning, gray Pacific. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. Elias didn't panic from depth or pressure. He saw something, and he died trying to destroy the evidence, I said, placing a carefully concealed, encrypted drive on the table. It contained a loop of the 3.8-second echo and a document detailing my thermal and deep mining correlation theories. Clara didn't flinch. Elias called me 3 days before the dive. He said he was going down to the lowest level of hell. He wasn't religious. He was terrified. She picked up the drive. The Navy said the cameras failed. They told me he was hallucinating. He wasn't. We saw a structure. Not a fish, not a machine. A living, colossal, magenta torus. And it spoke a single thought. Elias and I heard it simultaneously. I repeated the phrase, my voice trembling. We waited for the water to drain. Clara looked out at the ocean, a thin line of white foam breaking on the distant rocks. My father was a fisherman. He always said the real fear isn't the ocean, it's what the ocean is hiding. But that fear is only valid as long as the hiding works. She had the capacity for belief. I had found my ally. But as I was leaving the cafe, the paranoia hit a new peak. The rhythm in my head suddenly intensified. Thrum, thrum, thrum. I checked the news feeds on my secure burner phone. Reports were filtering in. Inexplicable temperature fluctuations in the Fossa Magna off Japan. Deep-sea acoustic anomalies registered by NOAA buoys across the South Pacific. A sudden, massive shift in a geothermal power station in Iceland. The 3.8-second pulse, once confined to the Challenger Deep, was starting to show up everywhere. It was as if the entity had used the energy surge from the incident, the thermal release, the hull breach, to stretch its consciousness, its computational network, across the entire globe. It wasn't just one structure anymore. The magenta lattice was an expression of a consciousness now using the entire abyssal network of geothermal vents and deep-sea trenches as its antennae. The entity wasn't moving. It was waking up in parallel. Chapter 5. The End of Waiting. Clara went dark for 2 weeks. I stayed in cheap motels, watching the news, trying to find a pattern in the chaos. The global pulse was now undeniable, though military and scientific authorities blamed solar flare activity. Then, Clara reached out. She sent a single, coded message. Found the outlier. Pacific Ring, 4.1. I understood immediately. She had found a location where the pulse was not 3.8 seconds. It was 4.1 seconds. An anomaly in the global rhythm. A destination or a new action. I tracked the coordinates she sent. It pointed to the Tonga Trench, a massive subduction zone where the Pacific Plate slides beneath the Australian Plate. A zone of immense tectonic energy and, critically, a location where a major international deep-sea mineral and geothermal extraction platform was set to begin full operations within the month. They were going to drill, and they were going to start draining. I flew to Fiji, then chartered a fishing vessel heading toward the Tongan Exclusive Economic Zone. I had no plan other than to disrupt the platform, to delay the inevitable, to prove I wasn't crazy before the world descended into a madness far greater than mine. The platform, the Prometheus, was a colossal, ugly spider of steel floating above the turbulent water. It was surrounded by naval patrol boats, Chimera's protection. As our fishing boat approached the exclusion zone, the sky darkened, though there wasn't a cloud in sight. The water, usually a brilliant azure, turned a deep, unsettling black. And then, the pulsing rhythm that had been the background score to my existence for 3 years broke. The 3.8-second beat vanished. It was replaced by an impossibly fast, discordant, shattering shriek of pressure waves. The rhythm accelerated maniacally. 1.5 seconds, then 0.9, then 0.4. It sounded like a cosmic clock being violently overclocked. The fishing boat's hull began to groan with a sound I recognized instantly. The sound of metal failing under impossible stress, only this time, the stress wasn't internal pressure, but an external, targeted resonance. Turn back. Now. I screamed at the captain. The Prometheus platform was already succumbing. Its massive steel legs buckled, not snapped, but liquidized by the vibration. The main derrick, designed to drill miles into the seafloor, twisted and collapsed like wet clay. I saw the light. Not magenta this time. The entire ocean floor beneath the Prometheus seemed to exhale a vast, blinding white-hot light. It wasn't the slow, pulsating glow of the Challenger Deep sighting. This was immediate, pure, cataclysmic energy. And then, a physical shape rose. It wasn't toroidal. It was columnar. A cylinder of black, obsidian material, miles in diameter, rising straight up from the Tonga Trench. It was so vast that it didn't look like an object rising from the water. It looked like the water was draining around a new planet forming beneath the waves. It rose past the sinking platform, past the surface, and stopped, its sheer height displacing a wall of water. Not a wave, but a static, crushing swell that instantly swamped our little fishing vessel. I was thrown into the churning, boiling water. As I struggled, choking on salt and oil, I looked up at the impossible structure. It wasn't living in the biological sense. It was the weighting itself. It was the deep crust, organized by an intelligence that predated life on the surface. And in my mind, the final, accelerating pulse peaked. The shattering resonance delivered the second part of the message, completing the devastating sentence I had received 3 years prior. We waited for the water to drain. Now we will help it. The sheer force of the thought, now a command echoing in my skull, caused me to black out. When I woke, I was clinging to a piece of debris, bobbing in water that was still unnaturally warm. The massive structure was gone. The Prometheus was gone. The naval ships were gone. But the silence was the most terrifying change of all. The 3.8-second pulse was nowhere. The global pulse had stopped. Over the next few days, global seismic reports were censored, then buried. Tsunami warnings were quickly revoked. But the data leak came anyway. Clara, who had set a dead man's switch on my files, had released the echo and the analysis onto the dark web. The final files she released included a terrifying, real-time comparison, a global satellite map showing a sudden, minor, but mathematically impossible shift in sea level. It wasn't a sudden rise, it was a drop. A drop of roughly half an inch, distributed globally, coinciding with the massive, localized displacement event at the Tonga Trench. The oceanic volume of the Earth had decreased. I am now back in the custody of Chimera, confined to a high-security mental health facility far from the sea. They try to treat the delusion. They tell me the Tonga Trench incident was a massive undersea landslide triggering a steam explosion. They tell me the Earth's mean sea level is constant. But the walls of this room are soundproofed, and the air conditioning hum is perfectly regulated to mask low-frequency noise. They are treating my mind, but they are terrified of my data. I watch the news on the facility's mandated television. They are talking about a new global initiative. Massive, subsidized deep-sea desal projects, rapid construction of coastal barriers, and unprecedented global investment in geothermal power and deep crust excavation. All designed to subtly remove water from the oceans and access the heat below. They think they are solving a problem. I know they are following instructions. And sometimes, when I press my ear to the concrete floor of my cell, I can feel a faint, low-frequency pressure on the bone. It's not a pulse. It's a rhythmic, silent friction. The sound of the abyss finally stirring, not with the beat of a distant heart, but with the rasp of a colossal tool beginning its work. The waiting is over. The draining has begun. And the silence is the sound of the ultimate predator, now fully awake, and satisfied. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video so you never miss an upload.